All right, Shabbos, say good morning. School Baruch Hashem to you to begin. Another day of learning with everyone. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz. Daniel and Batsheva Pava of Hashmonaim, Eretz Yisrael, in commemoration of the Yahrtzeit of their father, Reb Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh, Vegh, Philadelphia, on the occasion of his first Yahrtzeit. Reb Shlomo was a child survivor of Auschwitz, talmid muvhak of Reb Michel Ber Weismendel. He left 90 plus descendants who are yireh Shamaim. May his neshama have an aliya. Incredible. Our week of learning sponsors, Yehuda Jennie Goodhart, in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Jennie's father, Yeshaya Zalman ben Lazar, Zichron Livracha. The Brem family of Renana Eretz Yisrael, the Ilui Nishmas, their mother, Leah Riva Chaya Bas Meir Louise Brem, on the occasion of her 25th Yahrtzeit. Louise Brem dedicated her life to uplifting and educating the most challenged students, as well as inculcating a tremendous love of Torah and Eretz Yisrael in her family. It is a tremendous chus for her family in Eretz Yisrael to sponsor words of Torah that is being spread throughout the world. Incredible. Steve Goloskov, in memory of Toba Rabinowitz, Toba Bas Yehoshua, Yaacov Zichron Livracha, sister of Shevy Friedman, and in memory of Adina Zahavi, Adina Batsheva Bas Dov Ber Azriel Zichron Livracha, sister of Yossi Openden. So many beautiful and overwhelming dedications today. We thank all of our sponsors for their generosity. We hope in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliya. The families a neshama. Our hostages will be returned to their families, b'shalom and b'karov, and our precious soldiers will be successful b'chol ma'aseh yadehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, a really great daf ahead of us. And up next couple of days, some really exciting. It's always exciting. Some really fascinating Gemara, some halacha, some hashkafa, some agarata, a little bit of a mix. Anything and everything you could ever want out of a blot of Gemara, Meretz Hashem, we will find over the next few days. So today's daf is Yudalid 14. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on the bottom of Yud Gimel base 13b. 13b, Tan Rabbanon. 2 lines up from the bottom. Tan Rabbanon. Supposed to remember again, we're getting now actually into some of the interesting halachos concerning how a scroll is supposed to be structured. That's the right terminology. So remember again, all of their svarim, from the Gemara's perspective, were in scroll form. So the shaila is, are there certain obligations or certain details that the scroll has to conform to? So if a person wants to put all of Tanakh into one scroll, he has the ability to do so. Now the truth is, what the Gemara says over here is a davar pashut. We already saw actually beforehand was a machlokes. Remember in yesterday's daf we had a 3-way machlokes in Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachamim about how a scroll is permitted to be structured. So this price over here reflects the idea that you could put all of Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim into one scroll. So the Gemara says, however, again, when doing so just to understand the imagery over here, this scroll that they're talking about sounds like it's talking about that it has 2 poles, like what our Sefer Torah has. So the Gemara says over here that you have to leave enough blank parchment at the beginning of the scroll so that the blank parchment could wrap around the pole, and enough blank parchment at the end of the scroll that it could wrap around the circumference of the rest of the scroll. So just keep that in mind. Now, whether that means that maybe it's a 1-pole scroll, and therefore, again, at the end it's just saying leave extra parchment so that it wraps around the circumference, or it's a 2-pole scroll, we'll discuss in just a little bit. So the Gemara says, take a look at Rashi, Kedei Lagol Amud, you can look at both. Kedei Lagol Amud, Maniach Klaf Chalak Legalgel Al Gabe Amud Shal Eis, Shah Sefer Nigla Lalav. So in the beginning of the scroll, you have to leave enough blank parchment that you can wrap the blank parchment around the pole. In the end, B'sofa Kedei Lagol Hakef, B'sofa Maniach Chalak Gadol Kedei Lagol Bo Kol Ekefo, Shein Ose Shnei Amudin Legolo Le'emtso, Kimoshana Osin LeSefer Torah Elegolo Mitchilas LeSofo, the Korech HaChalak Al Kol Hakef. Okay, so here Rashi explains that we're actually talking about a 1-pole scroll. This is not a Sefer Torah scroll with 2 poles. This is a 1-pole scroll. So in the beginning of the cloth, you leave a little bit of blank cloth to wrap around the pole itself. at the end of the Sefer, this is a Tanakh Sefer, you leave enough blank parchment to serve as a cover for the rest of the scroll, to wrap around the rest of the scroll. So that's the cover of the scroll, okay? And so whenever you finish at the end of one column, you begin on the beginning of the next column. Now remember again, we spoke about this also in yesterday's daf, that there were certain halachas about the amount of blank space that you have to leave between the conclusion of one section and the beginning of another section. Here the Gemara says, if whatever you finish, because remember this is a scroll of Tanakh, so whatever you go ahead and you finish at the end of one column, you don't have to leave any space. Rather, you just begin, or I should say it's not a functional space, you just begin at the beginning of the next column. Fine. So the Gemara says, top of your dalet, vim balachto chosech. Now, if you want, it's actually interesting. So remember, again, on both sides. So this is a Tanakh scroll. Torah, Nevim, and Kesuvim, all in one scroll. So detail number one. The beginning has to have enough blank parchment in order to wrap around the pole. Halacha number two. The end has to have enough blank parchment to wrap around the entire scroll. Halacha number three. If you finish a section on the bottom, even if technically there's some more space to start the next section on that bottom, don't do that. Rather start the next section on the top. Okay? Then halacha number four, the Gemara says, if you want to go ahead, then balachto chosech, which means if you want to separate the sections. Let's say you decide, you know what, you want to go ahead and separate off Nevi'im from Torah. So the Gemara says, you're allowed to do that. Chosech, you're allowed to do that. So the Gemara says, my kamra, what does that mean you're allowed to do that? And others will say, of course you're allowed to do that. Why would you be allowed to do that? Because everyone is agreeing that the idea of putting all of Tanakh in one scroll is not ideal. Right? The idea over here, we saw already yesterday's daf, it's so much better to go ahead and write independent svarim. So why does the Gemara have to say that if you want to detach the various sections you're allowed to? That should be pretty obvious. To which the Gemara says, this is what it means to say, Shem balachto chosech. No. The reason why, when you finish one section on the bottom, that you should begin the next section on the next column, right, which essentially is the next piece of cloth, is because this way, if you want to go ahead and detach the sections, you have the ability to do so. In other words, think about it like this. Imagine for a moment, you went from the end of Chumash Devarim, let's say Chumash Devarim ended at the middle of a column, and then you started Sefer Yehoshua on the bottom of that column. For argument's sake, then what would be the problem? The problem is if you ever wanted to divide up those scrolls, you couldn't do it. Why? Because Sefer Yehoshua and Chumash Devarim are written on the same piece of parchment. Masha'enkein, if you finish Chumash Devarim and you begin Sefer Yehoshua on the next column, the next piece of parchment, like this, if you ever want to detach them, you could do that. Same idea in the different svarim of Nevi'im. Same idea, by the way, in the different, you don't even have to be as dramatic from Chumash to Navi. You finish Chumash Bereshis on the bottom of one column, you want to go ahead and start Chumash Shmos on the next piece of parchment, the next column. This way, again, if you ever want to divide up everything, you have the ability to do so. Incredible. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is the kasha. Tchila sefer v'sofo kedei logol. So let's just remember again. So now let's contrast this. We had a halacha that said as sauce. Remember, you are making a one-pole scroll. So what did the Brisa say? What did the Gemara say before? The beginning of the cloth, you have to leave enough cloth to go out and wrap around the pole. The end of the cloth, the end of the scroll, what do you need? Enough cloth to what? To wrap around the entire circumference of the scroll. Essentially, leave enough empty parchment to serve as a cover for the rest of the scroll. Now the Gemara quotes another Brisa. Tchilas sefer v'sofa. When writing one of these scrolls, in the beginning of the sefer and at the end of the sefer, kedei logul. You have to leave enough blank parchment to wrap around it. So the Gemara says, kedei logul mai. Wrap around what? Excuse me. I kedei logul amud. If we're talking about enough blank parchment to wrap around the pole, so kashya hekif, then ultimately I will say, what do you do with the previous price that said that you have to leave enough parchment to wrap around the entire circumference of the scroll at the end? Ikadei logol hekif, and if you're telling me that it's enough parchment to go ahead and wrap around the circumference of the entire scroll, kashya amud, then what do you do with the previous price that said that at the beginning you have to leave enough blank parchment to wrap around the pole? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak litzdadin katani. Rabbi Yitzchak said, you're right. No. It's talking about two different things. Both say, as we were talking about before, there's two different blank parchment obligations. At the beginning of the scroll, we're going to both say, just once again, remember, this is a one-pole scroll. So not like the Sefer Torah that we have, a one-pole scroll. There are two obligations of blank parchment. In the beginning of the scroll, there's the obligation to leave a little bit of blank parchment, enough just to wrap around the scroll. At the end of the scroll, they have to leave enough blank parchment to what? Wrap around the entire circumference of the parchment itself, effectively serving as a cover. Okay, so that's our first approach. Rav says, no. Kitanyahi b'sefer Torah. They both say that last price we just mentioned ultimately is talking about a sefer Torah. They both say in a sefer Torah, what's the halacha? In a sefer Torah which has two poles, you also have to leave blank parchment at the beginning and at the end. But how much blank parchment do you have to leave for a sefer Torah? Just enough blank parchment to wrap around the poles. So again, when you're dealing with a one-pole scroll, so again, there are different halachos of blank parchment at the beginning and at the end. In the beginning, enough to wrap around the pole. At the end, circumference around the entire scroll. In a Sefer Torah, all you have to do is leave enough blank parchment at the beginning and at the end to wrap around both poles. Okay, beautiful. So the Gemara says, Kidisanyo, Kala Svarim Niglalim Mitchilas and Lasofan. All other svarim. Let's say, this is actually interesting. So Machlokes over here, Rashi tells us, we're just going to go with Rashi. So the Gemara says over here, all svarim, all scrolls. Now these are talking about one pole scrolls. All scrolls in the Glolim Mitchilas and Lasofan generally are rolled from their beginning to their end. The Sefer Torah Nigla le'emtziaso. A Sefer Torah generally should be kept rolled towards its middle. Okay, take a look. Fine. So the Gemara, fine. So let's leave it. The Gemara says, so let's open. Nigla lemsi. Says Torah nigla lemsios va'oselo amud elech ve'elech. And furthermore, again for a Sefer Torah, ultimately again you want blank parchment in the beginning and in the end, both to go ahead and wrap around both poles. Okay, Amar Belaz Rav Sadak. Kach hayu kosvei svar Yerushalayim osin sifrayim. So Rabbi Lazar Bar Sadik says, this is how the Sofrim in Eretz Yisrael would go ahead and make their Svarim. Tan Rabbanon, Einosin Sefer Torah, Lo Arko, so I'll say good. So now, so just so you understand what we're left with over here. So we're left with over here these two different models of scrolls, our classic Sefer Torah with two poles, and our, what we'll call our other scroll with one pole. Now, what was that other scroll, that one pole scroll? That could be anything. That could be Chumashim scroll. You could have a different scroll for each Chumash. You could have a scroll of Tanakh. You could have a scroll of Nach, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. Again, should you put everything together, not put everything together? So that's still subject to our Thruyah Machlokes, or Meir Rabbi Yehuda Jennie that we saw in yesterday's daf. Fine. So now we're transitioning a little bit to a different topic. Tan Rabbanan. Ein osin Sefer Torah lo arko yeser al hakefo, velo hakefo yeser al arko. I suppose say this is an interesting halacha. So the Brisa says over here that a Sefer Torah, its height should not be greater than its circumference, and its circumference should not be greater than its height. So apparently, the proper dimensions of Sefer Torah is that circumference and height should be the same. Okay, Shalu es Rabbi. He said to Rabbi, okay, so Shir Sefer Torah Bekama. So based on this, what is the optimal height of a Sefer Torah? So the Gemara says, Amar Lahen Bigvil Shisha. So Bigvil Shisha. If you're dealing with Gvil, now both say, Rashi points out over, we've seen this before, Gvil is thicker parchment. There are different forms of processing hides, and depending on how you process the hide, dependent on the thickness of the parchment. So therefore, Rabbi said like this: if we're talking about a Sefer Torah of Gvil, which has a thicker hide, then ultimately, again, the height, and by extension the circumference, would be 6 tfachim. 6 tfachim, that's the height. Beklaf, bekama. What if you're writing a Sefer Torah out of klaf? Ultimately, again, how tall? What's the height of that Sefer? So Rabbi said, Eini odea. Rabbi said, I'm not sure. First of all, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Shir Sefer Torah Bekama, Arkomi Bailu. So what's the proper height of a Sefer Torah? So Rabbi answered, Bigvil Shu'av. So Gvil is thicker parchment. ve'kifo gadol, and therefore again its circumference is larger. So tzarech shisha tfachim requires a height of 6 tfachim. Zohi mida lios nigmar b'shisha tfachim hekif b'ksav benoni. So if you want to go ahead and have a Sefer Torah that is made of gvil with average size script, which average size writing, ultimately again you're going to have a height and a circumference of 6 tfachim. Okay, well the truth is, which remember I will say, remember you're going to have to measure the height first, right? So in other words, so the height will be 6 tfachim with average size writing will yield you a sefer with a circumference of 6 tfachim. Okay, but Rabbi didn't know in terms of cloth. So apparently, again, you can see that they were using gvil. We saw this already, but we've seen this before. They were using gvil more than they were using cloth. So Rabbi wasn't sure about the dimensions. Ultimately, again, of cloth. Rav Huna Kasov. So the Gemara says Rav Huna Kasov Shivin Sifrei Daraisa V'lo Isrami LeElachad. So let's say Rav Huna wrote 70 Sifrei Torah. 70 Sifrei Torah. And only one time did he manage to make a sefer that had the same height and circumference. So we're just pointing out, people say, what's the chap? What's the chap ultimately? In other words, what do we matter if the Sefer Torah ultimately has the same height and the same circumference? So with Pashtos, it seems like it's just like a din in perfection, like a din in completion, like all the measurements turn out to be the same. Torah, the beauty of Torah is that Torah is the one thing in this entire world that is perfect. Right? Torah, Kuchabichu, Chati, Torah, the Ribbon Shalom is all one thing, one entity. So the Ribbon Shalom is Hatsur, Tamim, Palo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately, again, is the rock, is complete. It's complete. Torah is the rock, is complete. This notion of having something with the same height, the same circumference, represents a certain completion in measurements. Is supposed to convey to us, the user, the completeness, the perfection of Torah. So the Gemara just says there's something very interesting. So Rav Huna was a sofer. He wrote 7-day Sifrei Torah, and out of his 7-day Sifrei Torah, he was able to get it right once. So you see from here, by the way, it's not ma'akev. In other words, even if you go with this idea that this is the ideal, it doesn't impact the kashrus of the Sefer. So we'll say, so it's interesting to see how Rav Huna wrote 70 Sifrei Torah, and he got the measurements right how many times? Once. Which tells you something absolutely amazing. Torah is perfect. But there is no expectation of perfection on the user. Right? In other words, so we are all privileged to learn a perfect Torah, to partake of a perfect Torah, to ingest a perfect Torah, but yet the usage and imbibement of a Sefer Torah in no way creates an expectation of perfection for us. And that is such an incredible and important yesod. Use the source of perfection, enjoy the source of perfection, learn perfection, but absolutely no obligation upon us to become perfect individuals. What do you say? So the Gemara goes weiter. Ella, so Elachad, Rav Achar bar Yaakov Kasav ChadAmishicha Deigle V'Isramile. So Rav Achar bar Yaakov one time was able to go ahead and write a Torah with these perfect dimensions, where the height and the circumference equaled each other. He did it on a calf skin, V'Isramile, and it worked out. So the Gemara says, Yavu Bei Rabbanan Einav V'Nach Nafshe. Little thing, and I will say, the Rabbanan set their eyes upon him, and he died. I will say, so what's going on over here? So it's not immediately clear what's going on over here, right? But Lamaisa, this seems to be one of these situations of Ayin Hara, that here of Achar Yaakov got it right. No one else had been able to get it right. And this accomplishment caused much envy and jealousy amongst his rabbinic colleagues. Went ahead and created an Ayin Hara. So we've spoken about this Ayin Hara many times before. That's when I have something, when I do something or possess something, and again, it invokes envy or negativity or jealousy or sadness in others. My bracha creates a negative reaction in something else. Unfortunately, in someone else, that bracha boomerangs back and has a negative impact on me. So here, Rav Achar bar Yaakov was able to write this one sefer in such a perfect way. No one else was able to do it. It caused this sense of envy, jealousy, sadness in others, and as a result, led to his demise. Pretty dramatic. We'll say so let's go right there. This idea that Torah is perfect, and here you should have something where the height and the circumference ideally match each other, but yet man has difficulty producing this. man has difficulty producing this. They will say is the story of the human condition and the story of the Yid. But we've quoted this many times before. The pasuk says, one of my favorite drashas, Va'anshe kodesh tiyun ubasar basada treifa lo sochela. I think I quoted this a couple of weeks ago. Pasuk says, be holy people, anshe kodesh tiyun basar basada treifa lo sochela. Don't eat a treifa. Treifa is an animal that is killed by another animal. You have to eat an animal that had proper ritual slaughter, proper shchita. So the Kotzker says, what's the drush over here? Anshe kodesh tiyun. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I have more than enough malachim. I don't need any more angels. What do I need? I need a few good men, right? I need a few holy men. Anshe kodesh tiyun. Just be holy people. Don't strive to be malachim. So often in life we encounter a sense of frustration in our Yiddishkeit because we're striving for the wrong thing. We're striving for perfection. We're striving for angelic status. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's not what I'm asking of you. I'm asking you just to be the best people you could be. Recognizing that as a person you're going to fail. As a person you're going to fall. As a person you're going to sin. That is the nature of the human condition. So don't try to hold yourself to an expectation you're never going to make mistakes. Minimize your mistakes. Try not to repeat the same mistakes. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm just asking you to be excellent people. So it's I don't know, to me this is what this whole thing represents. Torah is perfect, so really man should try to create the perfect Torah. And what is going to keep telling us over and over and over? People can't produce perfect Torahs. Sometimes one here out of 70, one over here, Rav Yaacov, one over here. But Lamaisa, even Torah which is perfect cannot be replicated in a perfect way by man. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, that's okay. That's okay. That's not what I expect of you. I don't expect perfection. I don't expect, angel kite. I just expect you to be the best people. Anshe kodesh tiyun. Incredible. Because of Rabbi Ami, Dalid Mea Sifrei Torah. It's interesting. So listen to this. It says Rav Hamnuna. So Rabbi Ami wrote 400 Sifrei Torah. So I will say, no one could write 400 Sifrei Torah. Impossible. So the Gemara says, Dilma. So it says, so how do you round this in? This Rav Hamnuna said, Dilma, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Kasav. Maybe what they used to do is they would mechabed Rabbi Ami, they would honor Rabbi Ami with writing the phrase, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu went ahead and commanded Torah to us. Morasha Kilas Yaakov, right? An inheritance for Yaakov. So maybe that's what it meant. Maybe because that pasuk is like the ikar of Torah. That ultimately, and they were always so maybe they were mechabed Rabbi Ami 400 times with writing that particular pasuk. Maybe that's why he says Rabbi Ami wrote 400 pasukim. Take a look at Rashi. Dilma Torah Tzivalanu Moshe Marasha Kasav Arba Meos Pamim Aval Ba'arba Meos Svarim Ein Penai La'adam Echad Lichtov. I will say it's not possible. One person can't write 400 Sifrei Torah. It's like Gemara says, it's not possible. There's not enough time in one's lifetime. I guess maybe if a person's ambidextrous, right, and Mamish writes 2 Svarim at once, even then I will say, not enough time in this world, not enough time in this lifetime to write that many Svarim. So for the Gemara says, maybe it means they were mechabedim with this passage. I will say, if you take a look at Tosas is right across on the left, a beautiful Tosas. He says, Dilma Torah Tziva, Vam Rabbeinu Tam, Da'osa Pasak Karoi Torah. This pasuk of Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, that ultimately Moshe Rabbeinu gave us Torah, Morasha Kilas Yaakov, it is Morasha inheritance for Yaakov. So Tosha says this pasuk is called Torah. Kedabar Paragimel de Sukkah, Katan Hayodeh Ledaber. Once a child knows how to speak, Aviv Malamdo Torah. His father is obligated to teach in Torah. I will say this is so incredibly important. Once a child knows how to speak, ultimately his father should teach him Torah. My Torah, what does it mean his father should teach him Torah? Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. The first words of Torah that we give over to our children. And by the way, if you're in the parish of grandchildren, this is good for grandchildren as well. Right? L'maisa Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. The first words of Torah that a child should be taught is that Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu taught us Torah, Morasha Kihilas Yaakov. I will say now, why is that the first lesson that we convey to our children? Someone will say, Torah Moshe teaches our children that they are part of something bigger than themselves. The Torah that I learn about, the Torah that I learn comes from Moshe Rabbeinu, and again, literally, I am part of a chain, and I could trace my part in the chain all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm not like someone coming in from the cold over here. Literally, again, my shalshalas HaTorah, my chain of transmission, traces its way. If I go back enough, I go all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. One of the first lessons in chinuch that we teach our children is that they are part of something bigger than themselves. The greatest existential danger is when a person falls into the trap of ego. A person falls into the trap of everything is about me, is about the self. The first piece of chinuch we give to our children is it's not about you. You're part of something so much bigger. You're part of Klal Yisrael. You're part of an Am. You're part of a shalsheles, of a chain of transmission. And yes, you young child, you could trace the words of Torah I'm giving to you, you could trace back all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the first part of the chinuch. What's the second part of the chinuch? Morasha Kilas Yaacov. The Torah that you get is an inheritance. They will say, it's interesting. What do you have to do in order to get an inheritance? What do you have to do? What do you have to do? Nothing. See, part of the beauty of Yiddishkeit is part of you, no matter what you do or don't do. See, a lot of times in life we think that Kedusha, holiness, is something you have to earn. You know the secret of Klal Yisrael? That we have conferred Kedusha. Kedusha, holiness, Torah, it's part of our DNA. It's in us. A lot of times in life we think we have to find it. And if you think you have to find Kedusha, well, if you find it, great. And if you don't find it, you're not Kadosh. It's not true. Morasha Kehilas Yaakov. Torah is an inheritance for us. An inheritance for us. Holiness is part of our DNA. It's embedded in us. Now, granted, you have to find it. You have to uncover it. You have to discover it. But it's not something external that you have to internalize. Anything and everything that we need in order to be holy people is already inside of us. Just what ends up happening in life. You know what ends up happening in life. We don't know what happens in life. I make bad decisions. I make wrong turns. What happens when you make bad decisions and wrong turns in life? You create piles of schmutz. That's the technical term. On top of your Kedusha. Until one day I wake up and I can't see any Kedusha inside of myself. So I make the mistake of thinking, I can't see it, so it must not be there. I have to find it somewhere else. It's not true. Life is all about clearing away the schmutz. It's all about taking away the layers that obscure the holiness. And I will say, once you do that, the holiness is there. It's the most incredible thing. Take off layer after layer after layer. That's why I will say, we spend life taking on things in order to go ahead and create additional holiness. While that's very beautiful, what does David HaMelech say in Tehillim? Sor meira v'yaseh tov. Veer away from evil and do good. Why does he put that first? Because David HaMelech is saying, chevra. The Kiddush is there. There's just so much schmutz that often accumulates over the course of life that you can't see it. So you think that you have to do this, you have to do that. Doing the good things is important. But if you begin to remove the layers of impurity, you'll discover the most beautiful wellsprings of Torah. Life is all about removing the schmutz. That's Morasha Kehilas Yaakov. Young child, Kedusha, you have it inside of you. Just remove the layers that obscure it, and you'll find the most beautiful wellsprings of holiness within. Incredible. So therefore, Rabbi Ami didn't write 400 Sefer Torah. No one writes 400 Sefer Torah. Rather, again, perhaps he just wrote Torah Tzivulanu Moshe 400 times. Only Rabbi Zera. Not similarly, again, I will say the Gemara gives other examples of this, of like hyperbolic statements that can't literally be true. So Rabbi said to Rabbi Zera, so not Rabbi Yanai Arba Mea Karmi. Rabbi Meir planted 400 vineyards. No one's planting 400 vineyards. Amarle Dilma Shtayim Kineged Shtayim Va'achas Yotzei Zanav. We will say, again, what is the minimal definition of a halachic vineyard? 5 trees, or five vines. 5 vines. The way it works is it's 2, and then 1 that comes out like a tail. So maybe when it says he planted 400 vineyards, it meant that he planted like these basic minimum vineyards. Okay. So Meisvei, Gemara is the kasha. So I'll say, so now the Gemara is intrigued by this idea of that the ideal Sefer Torah, the height equals the circumference. Someone's going to try to challenge this ultimately from the dimensions of the Aron. A very interesting Gemara. So Meisvei, Aron she'asa Moshe, the Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu made. Amasayim v'cheitz yarko. So I'll say, by the way, it's also interesting that the Torah calls it the Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu made. right? Whereas we know that again, B'Tzalel, right? B'Tzalel was really the craftsman of the Mishkan, but yet it calls the Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu made. So the Gemara says as follows: so Aron sha'asa Moshe amasayim v'chitzi Yaakov v'amal v'chitzi Rachbo v'amal v'chitzi Kamaso. So the Aron that Moshe Rabbeinu made was 2.5 amos in length, right? 1.5 amos in width, and another amma and a half in height. So the Gemara says, Ba'ama ba'shisha tfachim. Now the amma that we're talking about over here is an amma made up of 6 tfachim. We're going to see over here there's 2 different measurements because there's a machlokes. Ultimately, again, what is an amma 5 tfachim or is an amma 6 tfachim? So assuming we're not talking about an amma of 6 tfachim, now the luchos, the tablets themselves, Arkon Shisha had a length of 6 tfachim. Rachban Shisha, a width of 6 tfachim, which are both say, right, fine width of 6 tfachim. Ba'avyon Shlosha, and a thickness ultimately of 3. Now both say, Munachos Kineged Arko Shel Aron. They were situated along the length of the Aron. So Kama Luchos, Ochos, Ba'aron. So how much space do the Luchos take up in the Aron? Shnei Masar Tfachim, 12 Tfachim. Nishtayru Sham Shlosha Tfachim. So that leaves a space of 3 Tfachim. Semehen Tefach, says, remove from that a Tefach, right? Why? Really half a Tefach on each side. Chetzi l'kosel zeh, v'chetzi l'kosel zeh. Half a Tefach on one side, half a Tefach on the other side. So Nishtayru Sham Shnei Tfachim. You're left with 2 tfachim. Now, what occupied that additional space in the order of 2 tfachim? Shebahen Sefer Torah Munach. Okay, so we'll say a lot of information kind of being shared with us over here. In addition to having the luchos, according to this first approach, in addition to having the luchos, the tablets in the Aron itself, there was something else in the Aron. What else was in there? A Sefer Torah. What's Sefer Torah talking about? Take a look at Rashi. Sefer Torah. Shekasav Moshe Nemar Vayichtav Moshe Satorah. So we'll say Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a Sefer Torah, wrote an entire Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was placed inside of the Aron next to the Luchos. Shene'emar ein ba'aron rak shnei Luchos havanu asher niach sham Moshe. Because we'll say the pasuk in Malachim says, now listen to the wording over here, there is only in the Aron, ein ba'aron, there's only not in the Aron, only 2 luchos. So we'll say it's a double negative. My ein ba'aron rak. So we'll say, what does it mean? There's not in the aron but miot achar miot. So literally, again, it's an exclusion after an exclusion. Ein and rak. Vein miot achar miot el l'rabos. And a miot achar miot comes to include something. What does it come to include? Sefer Torah shemunach ba'aron. Not only were the luchos, not only were the tablets in the Aron, but ultimately, again, the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was included in the Aron as well. So the Gemara says, Pirnasta Aron the Arko. So that's fine. Now you've accounted for the Aron for its length. Say Parnas Aron l'rachbo. So now let's talk about the width. Kama luchos ochos ba'aron. How much space did the luchos take up in the aron? The width shisha tfachim, 6 tfachim. Nishtaru sham shlosha tfachim. That leaves us 3 tfachim of space. Semehen tefach chatziv l'kosel zeh v'chatziv l'kosel zeh. So remove a tefach from that. Half a tefach on this side for the wall, half a tefach on the other side for the wall. So the Gemara says nishtaru sham shnei tfachim. Ultimately, again, there's 2 tefachim of space. Why? Shelo yehei Sefer Torah nichnas v'yotze kishu dachol divrei Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, this is Rabbi Meir's model. So obviously it makes sense that you have 2 tefachim. Why? Because we'll say you can't have the Sefer Torah, the exact dimensions, right, of the width, because otherwise there's not going to be any room to take it out. There obviously has to be some space that Torah can be put in and taken out without scratching the sides. So we'll say, so this is Rabbi Meir's model. The Rabbi Meir's model is predicated on 2 ideas. Number 1, that an amas is 6 tefachim, and number 2, interestingly enough, based on these dimensions, the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was kept inside of the Aron. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda has a different approach. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ba'ama bas chamisha tefachim. Okay, so we'll say, Rabbi Yehuda's model is dramatically different. Now, why is his model dramatically different? On the most basic level, he's dealing with a 5 tefach amma. So obviously, if you have a 5 tefach amma, then what? You have totally different dimensions of the aron. So here we go. Rabbi Yehuda ba'ama bas shisha tefachim. Va'luchos arkan shisha v'rachban shisha. Now the luchos, we'll say everyone agrees on the dimensions of the luchos. The luchos have a length of 6 tefachim and a width of 6 tefachim. And a width of 6 tefachim. The avyan shlosha, and their thickness was 3 tefachim. Munachos ba'arko shel aron. Now they were placed lengthwise in the aron. So the Gemara says, "Kama luchos ochlos ba'aron." How much space do the luchos take up in the aron? Shnei masar tefachim. So 12 tefachim. Nishtayru sham chatzi tefach etzba l'kosel zeh ve'etzba l'kosel zeh. So it's like that would go ahead and leave a half a tefach of space. We divide that amongst the two sides. Literally, again, a finger's breadth on this side for this wall and a finger's breadth on that side. So leaving a little bit of space in between the luchos and the wall. So the Gemara says, Pernastala aron arko. So now you've explained to me the length. Say opiris aron l'rachbo. Show me now the width. So the Gemara says, Kama luchos ogdos. How much do the luchos take up? So sorry, Kama luchos ogdos ba'aron shisha tfachim, 6 tfachim. Nishtairu sham tavach umechza. That leaves a tavach and a half of space. Semehen chazi tavach etzba umechza l'kosal zeh. Vetzba umechza l'kosal zeh. That leaves about a finger's breadth and a half for each side, so that doesn't scrape up against the wall. Nishtairu sham tavach shabo amudin omdin. Okay, so both said this is fascinating. So that leaves us now with a tavach of space. What do they use as tavach of space? The 2 rods. What 2 rods are we talking about over here? So we'll say this is fascinating. Take a look at Rashi. Well, let's read the pasuk. Shnei amar apirion asa lo hamelech Shlomo. So literally again, apirion means like a throne. A throne. Did King Shlomo make mi'atzeh halavanon from cedar wood? Mi'atzeh halavanon amudav asa kesef rifidaso zav merkav argaman. So look at Rashi for just a moment. Shabo amudim omdim. Beis amudei kesef, kimin amudei sefer Torah, shofin la'arko v'haluchos beinehen, shnemar amudav asa kesef. So Rabbi said, this is fascinating. Apparently, Shlomo HaMelech put 2 silver rods, 2 silver poles, inside of the Aron. Now again, just to be clear, these were not the poles, the gold poles on the outside of the Aron that were used to transport the Aron. These were 2 silver poles put on the inside of the Aron that were supposed to represent the poles of the Sefer Torah. Those are, as Rashi says over here, Beis amudei kesef, kimin amudei Sefer Torah. Like the poles of a Sefer Torah, shochvin la'arko, they are put along the length of the Aron, v'haluchos beinehem. So the imagery here is quite beautiful. Just like a Sefer Torah has 2 poles, so do Shlomo HaMelech put 2 silver poles along the length of the Aron on top and on the bottom of the luchos, almost symbolizing poles for the luchos. Quite beautiful. Furthermore, again, so fine. So that's what he had in the Aron. Va'argaz sheshigru b'plishtim darla l'kei Yisrael munach mitzido. Okay, so we'll say. So therefore, just to point out over here, we're going to see in Rabbi Meir's model. So remember again, in Rabbi Meir's model, you have the luchos and the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu in the Aron. In Rabbi Yehuda's model, there's no room for the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Because remember again, you're dealing with less space. Why are you dealing with less space? He's only dealing with an amma that is 5 tfachim. So what does Rabbi Yehuda have in the Aron? He has the luchos, obviously. We'll see there's more than the luchos, but the luchos, he also has in there the poles, these silver poles. So where's the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu? So watch this. He says, now, right next to the Aron, outside of the Aron, next to the Aron, was Argaz Sheshigru Bo Plishtim, was literally again the case, or the chest, that the Plishtim sent back to Klal Yisrael. Now, we'll say, now remember again, we know the story that in Sefer Shmuel, when Shmuel's sons Chafni and Pinchas go out to war, they take the Aron with them to war. They're killed in battle, and the Aron, the ark itself, was taken captive by the Plishtim. Plishtim had a terrible time with the Aron, right? Wherever the Aron was, there was like an outbreak of hemorrhoids and diarrhea, and they literally could not, they had no choice but to go ahead and return the Aron back to Klal Yisrael. They return the Aron back together with a chest of gold. The chest of gold. So the Gemara says, Argaz sheshigru b'plishtim darla l'kei Yisrael munach misido. It's actually very interesting. That chest of gold that the Plishtim went ahead and sent back with the Aron, the chest, not the gold, the chest itself that they sent back was situated right next to the Aron on the outside. Shneimar ves klei azav asher shivosim lo asim tisime ba'argaz mitzido v'shilachtem also va'alav Sefer Torah munach, and the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was placed on top of that chest. So Rabbi Yehuda's model, remember again, there's not enough room for the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu inside the Aron. So you have the Aron, luchos, silver poles on the inside. Next to it, that chest that the Plishtim sent back, placed on top of that chest was the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu right next to the Aron. Shneimar lakoach asar Torah zeh v'samtem also mitzad Aron bris Hashem mitzadu munach v'lo b'socho. So I will say, Rabbi Yehuda's model, the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was placed next to the Aron, but not in the Aron. Umma ani mekayim, aim ba'aron rak. So says, what do you do with the pasuk that says there was only in the Aron? So what does that come to include? The Rabbos, Amud Beis, Shivrei Luchos, Shemunachim Aron. Say incredible. What else was included in the Aron? The broken tablets. The broken tablets. So I will say, so remember the whole chap over here is, remember the pasuk itself has this double negative. Ein ba'aron rak. A miut achar miut achar miut is l'rabos. So according to Rabbi Meir, the ribui comes to include the luchos and the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, what else does it come to include? What else is in the Aron besides the luchos? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, ultimately again, you had the full set of luchos and the broken luchos. So I'll say, so again, also Rashi points out there, look at Rashi, Shivrei luchos shemunachin tachas haluchos. So also this is quite beautiful. You had the complete set of tablets, and underneath the complete set of tablets were the broken tablets. Right? The first set of luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu broke were put in the Aron underneath the whole set. Incredible. We'll come back and talk about that in just a moment. So we'll say, now, watch this. The Gemara says, if you go back, so remember, let's come full circle. Why are we doing this? Besides the fact that it's rivetingly amazing and beautiful and fantastic. But remember again, our initial discussion was about the circumference of the Torah, right? The height circumference. 6 tefachim. If you think that a Sefer Torah has a circumference of 6 tefachim, Shabbos says, so remember again, for every 3 tefachim, ultimately in circumference, you have a tefach of diameter. And if a Sefer Torah is rolled to the middle, as we spoke about before, then ultimately again, the problem is, we'll say the dimensions are not going to work. To which the Gemara said, "Betray poshchi hechi Yosef." How could the Sefer Torah be situated in those 2 tefachim of space? Yaacov, Sefer Azara l'tchilasa hu niglal. So it's not a problem because the Sefer and the Azara, the Sefer of the Aron, was not rolled to the middle. Rather, it was rolled to the beginning. So the Gemara says, "Vakati trei betray hechi Yosef." Still, how can you get a scroll of 2 tefachim in a space of 2 tefachim? It's too tight. On Ravashi, the karach beporta, the karach ale. So I'll say it's interesting. So apparently the way they situated it is that they rolled most of it to the beginning and a little bit was put on top. So because of that, you were able to diminish the diameter enough to be able to fit it in a space of 2 tefachim without it being exactly snug against the Aron. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda, mikamei dalese argaz sefer Torah hechi havi yasiv. So it says incredible. So Rabbi Yehuda, so I'll say, so now, okay, so that's how you work out the dimensions of the Sefer. So I'll say now the Gemara is very intrigued because we have a fundamental machlokes over here specifically about the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. So remember again, according to Rabbi Meir, the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was placed inside the Aron. Now, so we're going to see, by the way, that it's also possible that everyone agrees that both the whole tablets and the broken tablets were both in the Aron. So according to Rabbi Meir, you have whole tablets on top, broken tablets below, Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu on the side. According to Rabbi Yehuda, whole tablets, broken tablets, Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was where? Outside of the Aron, situated on top of the chest that was sent back by the Plishtim. To which the Gemara asks a very simple question. That's fine after the Plishtim sent back the chest. Before the Plishtim sent the chest, where was the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu? Let's remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu writes his Sefer Torah in Chumash Devarim. Right? The story of the Plishtim happens in Sefer Shmuel. Right? So there's 2 Nevi'im there, right? So there's Yehoshua and Shoftim in between. So there's time in between the Plishtim sending back the Aron and ultimately again, and Moshe Rabbeinu writing his Sefer. So up until they got the chest back from the Plishtim, where was Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer Torah situated? To which the Gemara says, apparently there was a shelf. Which extended from the Aron, and on that shelf is where they placed the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Incredible, like an Aron extension. A shelf, that's where they placed it. Rabbi Meir, Hai mitzad Aron, my avidle. What does Rabbi Meir, supposed to remember again? Rabbi Meir holds that the Sefer Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu was inside the Aron. The problem is you have a pasuk from Allah that clearly seems to indicate that the Sefer Torah was on the side of the Aron. So what does Rabbi Meir do with this? Homi baile de misnach le mitzad v'lo misnach bene luche. So Rabbi Meir tells me that the nisad doesn't mean on the side outside of the aron. Rather, what does it mean? It means on the side inside the aron. Lest you think that maybe Moshe Rabbeinu's luchos should be placed in between the two tablets. No. The tablets were placed next to each other, and ultimately, again, Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer Torah was placed to the side. Incredible. The olam begabe minatzad. But ultimately, again, it was placed inside of the aron, but to the side of the aron. I have Rabbi Meir, amudim heicha havakaimi. So according to Rabbi Meir, so I'll say, now remember again, according to Yehuda, you have these silver poles inside the aron. According to Rabbi Meir, where were the silver poles placed? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, amudim heicha kaimi me avroi. Ultimately, again, they were on the outside. According to Rabbi Meir, the silver poles were not inside the aron; the silver poles were outside of the aron. For Rabbi Meir, shivrei luchos temunachim arbin alon. According to Rabbi Meir, where does he know that the broken luchos were also kept in the aron? Nafkali mid Rav Huna. The Lord is from Rav Huna. Rav Huna say, "Don't Rav Huna. Mai dichsiv asher nikra sham, asher nikra shem Hashem tzavakos Yoshev akruvim alav. Malamed sheluchos v'shivrei luchos munachin ba'aron." So Rabbi said this is quite beautiful. So Rabbi Meir calls this pasuk over here from Shmuel Aleph. So I'll say, so the lashon of the pasuk is Vayakam vayilech David v'chala am asher tomi bali Yehuda lahalos v'shames Aron ha'elokim asher nikra shem Hashem tzavakos. So they're bringing up the Aron, and when it refers to it, it calls it shem, two names of God. Why two names? Rabbi Meir says one is a reference to the whole tablets, the whole luchos, and one is a reference to the broken tablets. V'idach Homi baile. So we'll say, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that shem? Homi baile l'chid Rabbi Yochanan. Tam Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Yochai melamed shashem v'chol kinuyav minuchan ba'aron. So it was beautiful. He uses shem. Rabbi Yehuda uses shem to teach me that all of the names of Hashem were written and deposited in the aron. I think the Moshe has many different names. All of the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu were written down and deposited in the aron. Ve'idach nami baile l'hachi. Sorry, Meir, don't you need it for the same thing? So where does he learn out that even the broken tablets were in the Aron? Rav Yosef. So he learns that from Rav Yosef. The Tanya Rav Yosef, Asher Shibarta. So remember again, I will say, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Ve'echtav es haluchos es hadvarim asher hayu haluchos yishim asher shibarta v'samtem ba'aron. So right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, you're going to write the second set of luchos and go ahead and put them in the aron, right? Aluchos hashanam asher shibarta, right? And they'll replace the first set of tablets that you broke. So the Gemara says, asher shibarta v'samtam, right? V'samtam, the first set of luchos that you broke and you will place them. Malamed shaluchos v'shivei luchos munachin ba'aron. So we'll say, so it's interesting, the juxtaposition, the way the Gemara looks at the phrase, asher shibarta v'samtam. Right now, obviously, it's not really where the comma goes, right? But the Gemara understands the juxtaposition. Asher shibarta, the tablets that you broke, v'samtam, and you shall place them. From here, you see that what? Even the broken tablets are placed inside of the aron. Malamed shaluchos v'shivei luchos munochem. Teaches us that both the whole tablets and the broken tablets were placed inside of the aron. V'idach. What does the other opinion do with this? V'idach. What does it mean that you broke? That the Moshe gives Moshe Rabbeinu a shkoyach that he broke the luchos. You both say in general, Moshe Rabbeinu's breaking of the luchos is a fascinating dynamic. Because remember again, he did it of his own volition. He comes down from the mountain, sees that Klal Yisrael has built the golden calf, and decides on his own to break the luchos. And that was a real roll of the dice. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not tell him to do that, but he did it on his own. So the Gemara Darshan is over here that ex post facto, that Ribono Shel Olam gives him a shkoyach. Tells him shkoyach for doing that. I can almost say there's so much to be said about why Moshe Rabbeinu went ahead and broke the luchos. Why Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos? What did he understand that he was trying to accomplish by going ahead and breaking the luchos? What did he think he was going to do? So we often assume that Moshe Rabbeinu's logic was punitive. Klal Yisrael, you made a terrible mistake, you did something terrible that you should not have done, and therefore again you don't deserve this. I'm going to come back to this. Well, we don't have time for it right now because we want to get a little bit weiter in the Gemara. But I will say, but understanding Moshe Rabbeinu, why he? Fine, I'll tell you right now. So I will say, so there's something interesting. So there's an incredible idea. There's an incredible idea brought down in the name of the Talmidim of the Batsheva. That's how I saw it quoted, Talmidi Abesht. And I will say, get ready for this. The way leadership works, very quickly, the way leadership works is that, at least in Judaism, the way leadership works is that a leader can't be in an ivory tower. Right? So sometimes you'll have this idea that leadership means that you're muvhak, you're removed from the common folk. You're removed, there's the constituency, and then there's the leadership. There's the leadership. In Yiddishkeit, the power of leadership is to be part of the people. To be part of the people. So I'll say, get ready for this. Get ready for this. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from Har Sinai, and he realizes that Klal Yisrael has gone ahead and essentially broken or fractured their bond with the Ribon Shalom. Moshe Rabbeinu understands that in this moment, this is incredible, it is his sacred task to elevate the people. You can only elevate the people if you are there with them shoulder to shoulder. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, they've severed their bond. The only way for me to lift them back up is for me to fracture my bond as well. So what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? This is a manhig. What does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He takes the luchos that he just spent the last 40 days with the Ribon Shalom creating. They created those. Ribon Shalom wrote them and made them. But ultimately, again, it was done Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu together. They represented the totality of their bond. And what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He throws it down. He fractures it. He says, if their bond is fractured, then my bond has to be fractured also. Because the only way for me to lift them up is not for me to be above them, but for me to be together with them. Moshe Rabbeinu willingly fractures his bond so that he could go ahead and redeem and uplift a broken people. I'll say that's a manik, that's a leader, that's a Moshe Rabbeinu, a willingness to give up of your own ruchnius, a willingness to sacrifice your own elevated status, to be able to give and to do for your people. That's what Avas Yisrael is. When you're willing to give up of your own ruchnius, because you recognize that it's only if you stand shoulder to shoulder with your brothers and sisters that you are able to lift them up, to give up of your own elevated status, because you want to bring them out of their compromised status. That's a manik. That's a leader. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu, of his own volition, Moshe Rabbeinu, of his own free choice, throws down the luchos, fractures his own relationship. Why? So that he could be able to help Klal Yisrael repair their fractured relationship. And after the Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Shkoyach. Right? Asher shibarta, yasher kochecha, sheshibarta. At the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu, Shkoyach. Shkoyach that you broke the luchos. Because again, you showed Klal Yisrael, first of all, you showed the world what leadership is, and you showed Klal Yisrael. I was like, can you imagine in that moment when Klal Yisrael saw that Moshe Rabbeinu fractured his own relationship so that he could help them repair theirs, he gave them the most incredible chizuk. He gave them the most incredible strength. He helped them to believe in themselves. That was the power of Moshe Rabbeinu and the true paradigm of Jewish leadership. So we'll have to stop over here for today. A lot more to do. We also have to come back to Shivrei Luchos. There's a lot more in Shivrei Luchos we also have to do. All right, tomorrow's another day, another adventure. Shkayach, everyone.